This is section 6, the Great Depression, or block 6, the Great Depression. Block 6, the Great Depression. Section 5, after the 100 days, with the section beginning with Ruth Benedict. Ruth Benedict and her student protege, Margaret Mead, were not only women. They are clearly women, but they are beyond that. That they are the first women. Well, let's take them in turn. Ruth Benedict is the first woman to unquestionably become the leader of a scientific field. And she didn't do that because she was a woman, she did it because she was brilliant. She became the worldwide authority on anthropology. And her work in anthropology changed the whole field of anthropology. That she published a book in which she compared cultures to people. And that she said that cultures respond to stimuli in the same way that people do. And she wrote this whole long book, and if you study anthropology, you cannot avoid looking at Ruth Benedict. But to make a long story short, she is a scientist, she is a revolutionary person in her field, she reimagines the entire field of anthropology and becomes a world-famous scientist as a result of that. One of her students became even more famous than she did. This is Margaret Mead. Margaret Mead was also an anthropologist who very famously went and studied cultures in the remotest parts of the world, and especially the parts of cultures that were not necessarily always studied beforehand. She studied sex and gender roles and how the different sexes related to each other and what that meant for a society at large. And she took those ideas and applied them back to a study of the American people themselves about gender roles and sex roles and gender stereotypes and things like that. And she was way out there radical in the 1930s. But by the 1960s, Margaret Mead's theories are a lot less radical, and they became totally mainstream and accepted by the 1980s and 1990s in the United States. They start to look at the world through a lens that was new and revolutionary in the 1930s. That other cultures did things differently than Western culture did, that Europeans did, and maybe perhaps that the way Europeans and Westerners and Americans did things was not necessarily the best way to do it. They were unpopular for believing that. But in time, their theories became much more widely accepted, and their beliefs became quite mainstream. This is more evidence, ladies and gentlemen. This is more evidence of the growing importance of women in regular society. Not as women, but just simply as half the population now being able and being free to offer their gifts to the world. That Margaret Mead and Ruth Benedict are examples of the world becoming a smarter, better, more interesting, more intellectually diverse place because 50% of the population was now free to pursue that which they wanted to pursue. And we're not necessarily stuck having a domestic role as women were largely restricted to for a very long time. Two very important women.